Chapter 1. Gilded Cage. I stood still as Madame Beauchamp's icy fingertips inserted another pin into my bridal gown's radiant silk. The late afternoon sunlight shining through Father's big mansion windows should have warmed the fabric, but I felt a cold through the taffeta and petticoats. My corset pinched with each weak breath, like my future was shrinking. Madame Beauchamp grumbled, "Just a few more pins, Miss Montgomery," her French accent accentuated by the straight pins in her pursed lips. She surrounded me like a predator, tugging and stroking the expensive fabric over my hard body. 2 free-spirited sparrows flew through the spring air outside the leaded glass windows. I envied their freedom with a pain that endangered my serenity. I was confined in my father's home, being shaped into a proper bride for a man 3 decades my senior, while they flew back and forth, making their nest in the oak tree's extensive branches. "Would you prefer water, miss?" Martha muttered, her aged face scrunched with worry as she approached with a silver tray. For 15 years my lady understood my thoughts before I said them. I said thanks for her tiny kindness. Martha's eyes communicated without words. She perceived this gown as a glittering cage made of French silk and Belgian lace, not a symbol of joyous unity. I pointed to the bodice, where hundreds of seed pearls and crystal beads formed a delicate design that sparkled with every breath. "Are all these embellishments necessary? Feels overdone." Harrington explicitly requested it. We were shocked by my father's startling voice. Edward Montgomery, Boston financial magnate, stood with his hands clenched behind his back, scrutinizing me like he would new family collection acquisitions. He hopes his bride outshines all Boston women. Since Mother's death, 5 years earlier, our home had only ambition and calculation, thus his tone was unarguable. I looked away, my reflection in the mirror painful, and the truth descended over me like a heavy shroud on the chaise lounge. I was just another asset Maxwell Harrington could flaunt, a jewel to wear and a name to boost his social status, not a daughter to love or a woman with hopes. I went to bed early that night, claiming a real headache. I got up to get a book from the library downstairs after failing to sleep. Father rarely allowed novels in the house, calling them frivolous entertainments that fill women's heads with folly. However, I hid a volume of Tennyson's poetry in a dull economic treatise. I heard Maxwell Harrington's voice from my father's study as I descended the magnificent staircase, the polished mahogany railing cool under my palm. The door was slightly ajar, letting lamplight onto the Persian carpet. With slippers silent on the thick pile, I paused. Maxwell remarked Montgomery's financial empire is barely hanging on, his tone showing smug enjoyment in my father's misery. "Once I get his daughter and her inheritance, I'll control the bank. Eleanor will understand her role soon. Too many books and concepts in that gorgeous head." At his words, my gut twisted viciously. I supported myself on the banister. My father inquired, "Will you still proceed with the Boston branch arrangements?" His voice was unusually submissive, lacking the authoritative presence I'd known all my life. "Of course," Maxwell's voice exuded fake generosity. "Figurehead. But decisions need my approval." With my heart pounding, I backed away from the door. My pulse raced in my ears, nearly drowning out their discussion. Father didn't arrange a good match. To avoid bankruptcy, he sold me. With his calculating eyes and vicious reputation, Maxwell saw me as a commercial acquisition and a difficult intellect to be put down. Retreating up the stairs weakened my knees. I had to focus on each step as the dreadful truth dawned. In 10 days, Maxwell Harrington would own me like his mansion's furniture or his stable's horses, Martha exclaimed when she entered my bedchamber with the evening tea tray. "Miss Eleanor, whatever happened?" I preferred the shadows to the candles as I walked the abusant carpet in my dressing robe, shivering. "Martha, I can't marry him," I choked as tears fell. "He's harsh and wants my inheritance." Speech released a flood of emotions I could no longer contain. "Father knows. I'm the sacrifice in his deal with the devil." Martha dropped the platter with a clink and moved to the windows, drawing the heavy velvet drapes to exclude watchers. She sat alongside me on the bed, taking my frigid hands in her work-worn ones. Her voice was low and urgent. "My brother James conducts Western trains. His help helps ladies like you start over. My cousin teaches in Colorado." She held my gaze with winter-gray eyes. "Miss Eleanor, if you have the guts, there are opportunities." I couldn't, I thought. But Maxwell Harrington, a man who had allegedly led his previous wife to death via neglect and brutality, haunted me. "Martha reminded me of your mother's teaching certificate. I saved it when she died, and you have her spirit if you remember." Mother's portrait on my bedside table caught my attention. Caroline Montgomery followed me with kind, firm gaze. She taught in a modest academy until her marriage, advocating for women's education before it was trendy. She told me a bold heart finds a way even in the darkest. I trailed my finger down the silver frame, remembering her final days, and how she'd made me swear to live bravely and find joy whatever. Would she call this brave or cowardly? Avoiding my duty by fleeing, but had she realized Father would use me as currency in his frantic business dealings? Mourning strengthened resolve, not peace. After a night of prayers and tears, I entered Father's study shaking but resolute. This huge wood entrance, carved with the Montgomery family insignia, was meant to intimidate like the rest of our mansion. I knocked hard and waited for his brusque entry before entering the tobacco-scented sanctuary that had welcomed me as a youngster, but now housed his collapsing empire. I stood before his grand desk instead of taking the chair. Father, reconsider this match. Mr. Harrington is famously bad. His first wife, enough. Father closed his leather-bound ledger so hard that the crystal inkwell leaped. Agreements are final. Eleanor, you'll serve this family. Your mother expects nothing less. The recollection of my mother sparked a rare rage in me. Mother would never ask me to forego happiness for money. She thought marriage should be based on love and respect. Real life is unknown to you. His height was designed to intimidate me because it had many business rivals. Your security and the Montgomery legacy are secure with this marriage. Without it, we'll fail. You'll sell me to pay off your debts? I asked in a whisper. His face stiffened. You must marry a wealthy man who can support you like I have. Your romantic ideas are foolish and unrealistic. In that instant, looking into eyes my own color but without paternal compassion, I realized the reality. My father saw me as currency to trade, a last asset to leverage before collapse took his empire. My tiny hope for his help vanished. Hold still, miss, Martha said, cutting my waist-length auburn hair with lamplight-gleaming scissors. With each cut, I lost another piece of my life. After 23 years of care, my long curls fell to the floor around my feet, turning copper in the faint light. Outside the walls, the city slept, ignorant of the little insurrection. After midnight, we were in that transitional area where courageous decisions either fail or succeed. Martha handed me a little looking glass and set aside the scissors. A reasonable length for a young widow, I barely recognized the woman staring back. I looked different with my hair just past my shoulders and a gray traveling dress. Rather than Miss Eleanor Montgomery of Beacon Hill, Mrs. Ellie Wilson is a fictional educator and widow. Martha said James will meet you at South Station, putting a modest bonnet over my short locks. She placed a package and oilcloth in my shaking hands. This has everything you need to start over. Identification papers naming me Mrs. Ellie Wilson, teaching qualifications based on my mother's certificate but altered, and a Denver train ticket were in the packet. Martha prepared everything, including my left hand's gold band. She said I needed her mother's ring to complete my masquerade. I embraced her tightly, whispering, "How can I repay you?" "Just live well," she said. "Be happy. These aged bones are paid for." My mother's well-worn Bible was the one item I couldn't bear to leave behind, and I left a sealed note on Father's desk saying that I couldn't marry but would pray for his understanding. I didn't think he'd agree. I boarded the westbound train as dawn streaked the eastern sky pink and gold. As I saw Boston, my only home, disappear, I felt both terror and exhilaration. The whistle hollered, wheels clanked on metal tracks, and my new life began with an iron rattle. Free, terrified, alone, thankfully forever free. Chapter 2. Redemption Creek. As I traveled west, the regular clacking of train wheels peeled off another layer of Boston formality like an old skin. New York, Pennsylvania, and now the huge rolling expanses of territories I'd never read about had replaced Massachusetts countryside. I watched America bloom outside my window, wide meadows with wildflowers, purple mountains, and sky so big it swallowed the horizon. I removed the package of documents from my reticule and smoothed my gray traveling dress, still stiff from newness. Mrs. Ellie Wilson gazed at me from the fake teaching credential, its careful calligraphy concealing its deceit. I drew the strange mark with my fingers, learning loops and curves until they felt natural. Thomas Wilson, I muttered, making up my fictional late husband. Shipping company clerk. He succumbed to consumption after 8 months of marriage, simple enough to remember, but comprehensive enough to ring true. My rehearsal was interrupted by a wooden clatter from the cubicle door. The old couple came in, the woman with silver hair under a navy hat, and the man with a thick white beard and friendly eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Woman, pardon the interruption, my darling. Could we join?" The other compartments are full of minors going to silver camps. Of course, I said, quickly putting my papers away. Please, plenty of room. Reverend Harold and Mrs. Ida Henderson, missionaries returning west from Boston fundraising, sat across from me. Their politeness and discussion put me at ease. And you, dear? Mrs. Henderson politely asked. Mrs., where are you going? Wilson, I said, my heart skipping at my new name's first use. I'm not sure where I'm going, Mrs. Ellie Wilson. I'm a teacher looking for work. I spoke the half-truth more effortlessly than planned. Reverend Henderson raised his bushy eyebrow. Providence, he shouted, thumping his knee with fervor that astonished his wife. We just left Redemption Creek in the Colorado Territory. Last month, their teacher married the blacksmith and went to Denver. Town council needs a replacement before harvest season, and miners are needed in fields. Mrs. Henderson nodded warmly. The community is nice, Mrs. Wilson. Most are good Christians, but every town has its personalities. Leaning forward, she patted my hand. Room and board and a small pay are offered. Starting there is a blessing for many young teachers. I tried to look engaged rather than relieved. A coincidence couldn't explain this. Meeting these lovely people who contributed exactly what I needed most gave me a peculiar warmth when I realized it. Divine guidance. My first hope since leaving Boston. Can you tell me more about Redemption Creek? I asked eagerly. Would like to apply for the job. 3 days later, the train whistle shrieked our arrival in Redemption Creek. I peered through the window to see what could be my new home. A dusty main street, lined with weathered wooden buildings, ran beyond the railway platform, which was just a bench and little office. In the distance, snow-capped mountains shone against an unbelievably blue sky. As the train stopped, my stomach churned with worry and anticipation. I gathered my stuff with shaky hands, smoothed my travel-wrinkled clothes, and straightened my widow's bonnet. My small trunk of belongings seemed inadequate for my new existence. The Hendersons took me to the platform, where townsfolk waited for the twice-weekly train. A tall man with silver temples and a clerical collar wore a modest black suit. He was the town minister. Reverend Thomas, Mrs. Henderson called, waving enthusiastically. We've brought you a blessing from the Lord. The man approached, his face wrinkling into a pleasant smile that settled me. Harold, Ida, welcome home. We've missed your steady presence these past months. Reverend Thomas, allow us to introduce Mrs. Ellie Wilson, Reverend Henderson said, gesturing toward me. A qualified teacher seeking a position. Reverend Thomas turned to me, his eyes widening with barely concealed delight. Wilson, Henderson's forewarned you. You're an answer to prayer, ma'am. He clasped my hand with genuine warmth. Our children have been without adequate teaching for about a month. I smiled to project confidence I didn't feel. I hope I can be of service, Reverend. I'm eager to begin, if the position is still available. Available and desperately needed, he assured me. The town council will want to meet you formally, of course, but with your credentials and the Hendersons' recommendation, I foresee no difficulties. I saw a tall, broad-shouldered man outside a store across the dusty street. A youngster of 10 or 11 stood beside him, their matching dark hair and solemn features identifying them as father and son. The man was curious and somewhat tired, not hostile. His square shoulders under a faded blue shirt and aged hands at his sides conveyed quiet strength. The youngster, a miniature version of his father, looked at me suspiciously with his arms folded. Their solitary position on the busy station implied a shared loneliness that connected with me. After Reverend Thomas yelled my name, I turned away, wondering why the stranger's penetrating gaze had struck me so. The third step creaks a lot. Hattie Jenkins warned me as she took me up her boarding house's tiny staircase. Thought about fixing that, but good carpenters are busy here. The fat, happy 60-year-old widow welcomed me with genuine excitement. Within minutes of meeting her, I was taken into her clean kitchen, seated at a scrubbed pine table, and served thick pieces of fresh bread with sweet churned butter. She opened a door at the end of the upstairs corridor to proclaim, "This your room, Mrs. Wilson. Clean and pleasant, not fancy like back east." The chamber was basic. A short iron bedstead with a patchwork quilt, a small dresser with a porcelain basin and pitcher, a straight-backed chair, and a little writing desk under the room's window. It was tiny compared to my Boston bedroom, with its 4-poster bed and excellent furnishings. The room's honest simplicity struck me deeply. Calico curtains let sunlight pattern the smooth wooden floor. A little vase of wildflowers adorned the bedside table, and the linens smelt like lavender and sunshine. As I mentioned, it's great. Hattie smiled, her wide face pleased. Perfect for me. Teachers have always stayed here since I opened this facility 15 years ago after Henry died. She straightened a doily on the dresser. The hall has restrooms. Redemption Creek prides itself on indoor plumbing. Town council approved it 2 years ago. Even modest homes like ours have outhouses, but progress is made. I nodded graciously, but I was overwhelmed by the notion of communal bathing facilities and cheap accommodations so different from my lifelong solitude. What would Martha think if she saw me preparing to sleep in a space smaller than my home dressing room? Hattie bustled around the little apartment, opening the window to catch the afternoon breeze, saying town council will accept your employment tomorrow. Reverend Thomas's recommendation is a formality, but he's influential in town. I'm glad for his support, I muttered, slumping into the bed as exhaustion from the long drive hit me. Motherly Hattie touched my shoulder. Rest now, sweetheart. Dinner is 6 sharp. 3 more men are working on the new railway spur. Good people, but tough. You'll intrigue them, but they'll behave at my table or cook for themselves. After she went, I unpacked my small items, each a reminder of my old existence. I put Mother's Bible on the bedside table, my few outfits in the small wardrobe, and the fake paperwork in the desk drawer. I kneeled beside the tiny bed at night as I had since boyhood. The flooring pressed firm against my knees, unlike my Boston bedroom's luxurious carpet. Lord, I begged you for pardon for my dishonesty, however necessary. Help me navigate this new place. Help me earn these nice people's trust, even if I can't be honest about my background. I crawled between the clean, scratchy covers, exhausted after praying in a muddled tangle of thanksgiving and anxiety. My last thought before bed was that this dusty town with its magnificent name may hold the redemption I so sorely wanted. The next day, I entered the town hall, a spacious chamber over the general shop, filled with subdued talk. Behind a big table at the front were 5 council members. Thomas's encouraging smile provided silent support. Sheriff Daniels was a grizzled man with a silver badge. I met Mrs. Foster, the mercantile's owner, a pinch-faced woman with iron-gray hair pulled back. Mr. Peterson, an elderly banker with rheumy eyes and trembling hands, and Joshua Hayes, a broad-shouldered man I'd seen yesterday, a local rancher. Despite trembling, I presented my credentials to the council and answered their questions about my teaching philosophy and expertise with confidence. Martha's forged papers were detailed enough to pass scrutiny, but ambiguous enough to escape particular questions. Mrs. Wilson, you know that teaching here takes more than book learning, Reverend Thomas said. Our youngsters require Western-relevant practical knowledge combined with traditional studies. I said education should prepare youngsters for their lives while maintaining academic brilliance. Sheriff Daniels nods assent. Well said, ma'am. Too many Eastern teachers have fancy notions that don't work when the snow pile is 6 feet high or the crops require caring. Mrs. Foster, suspicious of me, leaned forward. Mrs. Wilson, where did you teach before? Her tone suggested she'd been saving this question. Swallowed hard. A modest Massachusetts private school. I replied truthfully but incompletely, keeping eye contact despite my rushing heart. Mrs. Foster pursed her thin lips. Your late husband squeezed. What was his job? Thomas Wilson. I still found the fake name weird. Working for a shipping firm. He died shortly after our marriage. The council members mistaken my discomfort for genuine anguish when my voice caught on the fake pain. I was surprised when Joshua Hayes, who had remained silent during the interview, softly interrupted Mrs. Foster. Maybe we've asked enough personal questions. His deep, quiet voice stunned the room with its subtle command. Mrs. Wilson's qualifications are clear. Providence has sent a qualified teacher for our kids. His surprise involvement made me grateful and confused. His black eyes glanced at me, with civility, not warmth, that contrasted with Mrs. Foster's cautious scrutiny. The council unanimously hired me with a $30 monthly salary and Hattie's room and board after I signed the contract as Ellie Wilson. I wondered if they could hear my pulse pounding or feel my relief and remorse. The dilapidated clapboard schoolhouse with a modest bell tower located at the outside of town, shaded by tall cottonwood trees where youngsters ate and played throughout the day. A big room had rows of scarred wooden desks facing a teacher's platform and blackboard. One corner had a pot-bellied stove, frigid in late spring but crucial in Colorado's hard winters. I cleaned and organized all weekend, scrubbing floors until my hands were raw, window washing until they shone in the sun. I organized books on the small shelf and prepared lessons for kids I could only guess at. From unfamiliar work, every muscle hurt. I had never dusted a shelf in Boston, but the discomfort was strangely satisfying. My new identity was embodied in this environment. Monday dawned bright and clear. After ringing the school bell with nervous hands, I saw youngsters come and go from the front steps, some walking from town, others on horseback or in farm wagons pushed by parents anxious to see the new teacher. 18 interested 6 to 1 6-year-olds entered the schoolhouse, seeking seats and whispering as they inspected me. Except for Caleb Hayes, who slumped in his seat toward the back, arms crossed angrily across his chest, his father's dark eyes staring from beneath an untidy shock of black hair. Most looked at me with interest or bashful grins. I inhaled, adjusted my navy skirt, and faced first class. Your new teacher, Mrs. Wilson, greets you. I look forward to meeting you in the future days. 18 pairs of eyes from young Mr. Hayes ranged from interest to apathy to fury. I'll learn your names and evaluate your progress this week, I said, my voice rising stronger. Let's start with scripture, as we should always. Open your Bibles to Joshua. As children obeyed, some faster than others, pages rustled. Be brave and courageous, I said, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. A tall blonde girl with braided hair concluded from the first row. I smiled, suddenly feeling at home. I wasn't Eleanor Montgomery leaving a loveless marriage, or Ellie Wilson lying. I was just a teacher helping kids who needed me. Yes, Joshua 1 to 9 exactly. The newly cleaned windows let morning light illuminate dust motes that danced in golden shafts above the children. For the first time since leaving Boston, my panic began to ease. Despite future challenges, I was where I needed to be. Chapter 3. Finding Footing. As I bent over my desk in the dusk, the oil lamp's golden light cast long shadows across the scarred wooden surface. The schoolhouse was quiet. As I learned my pupils' talents, and they learned my tactics, 2 weeks of names, assessments, and modifications flew by. Most of the math exercises before me showed improvement. Cleverly solved issues, neat columns of figures, and true comprehension. Finally, Caleb Hayes. I sighed and rubbed my sleepy eyes while reading his latest report. Calculations showed great understanding. He solved complex problems utilizing beautiful shortcuts I hadn't taught, showing mathematical brilliance. However, his penmanship was disordered, letters were transposed, and his written explanations were practically unintelligible. The loud sound of boots on the schoolhouse steps interrupted my thoughts. I looked up to see Joshua Hayes filling the doorway, his wide shoulders nearly covering the frame and hat held politely. The fading sunshine highlighted his cheekbones worn by outdoor work, and eyes that missed little. Mr. Hayes? Putting down my pencil, I said. Why are you here? The floorboards creaked as he entered. Sheriff reported your late-night walks home. Not safe, ma'am. His deep voice was concerned, not critical. Mountain lions have been seen closer to town this season, and drifters are always around. His kindness made my cheeks warm. I pointed to the paper in front of me to give some kids more attention. Grades take longer. His glance shifted from my face to the stack of papers, pausing on his son's work on top. His expression softened somewhat. Including my boy? I was surprised by his insightful question. Instead of a strict rancher, the village saw a parent concerned about his child's challenges. I then recognized that Joshua Hayes knew more than he said. His son, the town, possibly me. Showing Joshua his son's paper, I added, Your boy is good in arithmetic. Look at his solution. He invented a shortcut I hadn't considered. Truly impressive. We stood side by side at my desk, the lamps warming the page. I watched his pride fade into familiar concern as he traced the practically indecipherable letters. He has trouble writing, I said cautiously. His spelling is uneven and often reverses or omits letters. He may have trouble seeing the letters. Their position may change in his perception. I anticipated defensiveness or outrage at my assessment. Instead, Joshua's shoulders relaxed as if I'd verified a long-held suspicion. He whispered that his mother was the same, softening because of his late wife. Sarah could mentally compute large numbers, but confused her letters. She hid it effectively, memorizing words by shape instead of spelling them, and told me after we married. Admission definitely cost him. I felt he rarely mentioned his wife, especially to a stranger. I asked for your permission to do some specific exercises with Caleb to help him see letters more consistently. I hesitated, then suggested glasses. Vision issues can cause these issues. Joshua gazed at me with dark eyes of amazement. You'd do that? The last teacher called him lazy and stated he'd improve if disciplined. Fury rose within me. Mr. Hayes, Caleb isn't lazy. When he believes he can succeed, he tackles the hardest difficulties with dedication. I looked him in the eyes and became enthusiastic about this 2-week-old. Mr. Hayes, every child deserves dignity and personalized learning. Joshua's expression changed, lowering a barrier and suspending judgment. For the first time since arriving in Redemption Creek, I felt like a teacher who cared about her kids, not the mysterious widow from the East. I'd appreciate any assistance, he said. Mrs. Wilson, you stir too hard. Hattie laughed as I poured gravy over the saucepan. Gentle circles, like cradling a baby, not fighting a wildcat. Sunday after church brought an invitation I couldn't refuse. I was excited and nervous to dine with Reverend Thomas, Sheriff Daniels, and Joshua Hayes and his son at Hattie's. Hattie had asked me to help in the kitchen, while the men gathered in her little parlor, ignorant that I'd never cooked before. I gave the wooden spoon to her expert hands, admitting I'm worthless. Hattie added without judgment, "That fancy academy of yours didn't require much cooking. Never too late to gain useful skills." Trying to slice fresh bread, I hissed in pain when my hand touched the scorching stove. The angry red well formed on my palm immediately. A strong voice behind me said, "Let me see that." I realized Joshua Hayes had entered the kitchen unobserved. He took my damaged hand and examined the burn without permission. "Mrs. Jenkins, please get cold water," he asked, going into his pocket. He took a tiny tin container. He said, "Ranch work requires burn ointment," his calloused fingers surprisingly soft as he applied it to my painful skin during branding season. The ointment relieved me immediately, but his thorough massage warmed me. Though roughened, his fingers moved delicately, treating my tiny injury like a serious wound. Sheriff Daniels told us about his days as a Texas Ranger, and Reverend Thomas reported on mountain settlement missionary work. Dinner was lively. I skillfully avoided personal questions and focused on town issues and the Harvest Festival. Caleb abruptly said, "Mrs. Wilson's teaching me to read differently," following a short silence. "She thinks I see letters flip-flop sometimes, but am I stupid?" Silence fell at the table. The fork stopped halfway to Joshua's mouth. "She made me colorful paper to cover the words," the boy said, warming up, and I traced the letters with my finger while saying them. "Helps him stay put." Reverend Thomas agreed. "That way sounds good." Joshua watched me from across the table. I was surprised to see respect in his eyes, not just appreciation. After the afternoon shadows lengthened, Joshua offered to escort me back to the boarding house. Caleb rushed ahead with the sheriff's grandson, leaving us in a peaceful stillness interrupted only by children's laughter and aspen leaves rustling. He discreetly thanked us for noticing my son's potential as we approached Hattie's picket gate. "Few do." He spoke honestly, which moved me. No gaudy societal flattery, but genuine thanks from a father who wants the best for his child. I was honest. He made it simple. Joshua continued, "He has a remarkable mind like his mother," smiling as he offered me his arm for the last few feet. I felt the power beneath his tattered sleeve, and took comfort in it, even though I knew such comforts weren't for me. "Child Lord save?" Hattie asked, holding up my white shirtwaist, now a mottled gray. "What had you done to these linens?" 6 weeks into my new life, my Boston background was unprepared for frontier life. Disasters plagued my self-sufficiency attempts. A smoke stove that wouldn't ignite, laundry that looked worse after washing, and most recently, a loaf of bread so dense and malformed that Hattie's typically courteous boarders seemed frightened when I proudly offered it at breakfast. I acknowledge I'm making a mess, inspecting the damage with dismay. Thankfully, Hattie didn't laugh or chastise. She returned the damaged clothing on the line and took my shoulders in her motherly embrace. "No shame in ignorance," she said. "However, learning is rewarding. If you listen, ignorance is fleeting," my mother often emphasized. Hattie taught me how to light a fire, use bluing to whiten garments, and bake rising bread over the next few weeks. She taught me how to conserve late summer bounty for winter and about local plant medicines. While teaching me how to create an inflammatory poultice, she said every woman west of the Mississippi knows 3 things: ways to shoot straight, birth babies, and treat ailments without a doctor. None of these abilities were my forte, but I discovered unexpected delight in learning them. Bread that rose, a fire that didn't smoke, and a clothing that was clean seemed like another step toward my new identity. Hattie taught me to manufacture soap from rendered fat and lye, and Mrs. Foster dropped by unannounced. The mercantile owner often appeared unexpectedly, her acute eyes overlooking nothing. "How domestic you've become, Mrs. Wilson," she said, placing her large frame at Hattie's kitchen table without request. "You wouldn't think your prior job was academic, although I have much to learn. I replied that teaching doesn't prohibit practical abilities, churning the malodorous combination more vigorously than necessary. Mrs. Foster's weak smile didn't reach her eyes. You know my husband's home state is Massachusetts. He keeps in touch with family there. Your academy was in which county, Mrs. Wilson? The question looked casual, but gut told me it was not. Middlesex, I said, humbly thanking Providence for my great geography knowledge. A tiny town you wouldn't know. Mrs. Foster smiled wider. As a frequent correspondent, I know most New England towns. Please remind me of which community. Hattie interrupted me before I could respond. Eunice, you're worse than the sheriff at interrogations. Leave the poor woman. She wants to learn soap making, not geography. Mrs. Foster briefly squinted her eyes but let the topic turn. She left minutes later, but her calculated look over her shoulder sent a chill down my spine that wasn't caused by the autumn weather. For the Harvest Festival, the town square was decorated with bunting and vendors selling candied apples and handmade toys. Hay bales provided seating around a cleared dance space, and a fiddle tuning up promised evening entertainment after the children's games. I was assigned to organize activities as the new teacher: sack races, apple bobbing, and spelling contests with small rewards. The midday light illuminated the festivities, warming the cool October air. I watched my pupils compete to roll a hoop the farthest without dropping it. When Joshua said, "You've done well with the children's program. Someone respects you?" He was wearing a clean white shirt and darker vest instead of his usual dark work clothing, looking more relaxed than ever. He even tamed his wild hair for the occasion. I replied that most of them are good kids ready to learn. Caleb said his reading has improved, sounding amazed. Hay requested a book yesterday. Never imagined this day. Inner pride warmed me. I responded, "He's working hard," watching Caleb and the blacksmith's daughter fall into the dust in a three-legged sprint, laughing across the square. "Would you walk with me?" Joshua abruptly asked. "I'll gladly lead you through the celebrations." Something in his tone made my heart race. "I'd like that," I said. We wandered into the plaza, admiring the Ladies' Aid Society's efforts, eating Gunderson Farms roasted corn, and speaking with locals in a natural way. I nearly forgot that Mrs. Lee Wilson was a desperate creation in these moments. Lanterns around the plaza cast golden light at twilight, making the little town gathering spectacular. The fiddler, banjo, and harmonica played a lively melody, and couples started dancing. Joshua hesitated alongside me, losing confidence. He asked, "Will you honor me, Mrs. Wilson?" and extended his hand. I should have declined. Traditionally, a widow under a year should not attend such ceremonies. More significantly, every moment with Joshua increased my risk of him finding my falsehood, but I put my gloved hand in his and let him lead me into the dance crowd. He kept a courteous touch around my waist as we turned, separated, then reunited in the dance as figures according to the music and caller. I felt strangely odd in his arms. His strength and stability made me feel safer than since leaving Boston. Though not of him, I was terrified of the burgeoning sensations I couldn't allow myself. Every smile, kind touch, every moment of connection reinforced a relationship that would strangle me when the truth came out. As the music grew and lantern light illuminated his black eyes, I realized I was in danger. My life in Redemption Creek, my teaching, my friendships, and most notably my relationship with Joshua Hayes were constructed on a foundation of lies that could fall at any time. For this dance, with his hand warm against mine, and the stars appearing in the lowering sky above us, I imagined a different future. One where my history was buried and my heart could follow its growing desire. Chapter 4. Winter's Approach. I woke to a changed world. November arrived silently overnight, blanketing Redemption Creek in pure white that shone like diamond dust in the morning sun. Softened curves and breathtaking alabaster brilliance replaced the usual scenery beyond my boarding house window. Hattie hummed while lighting the stove downstairs. She poured me a hot cup of coffee and said, "First snows are unique. Kids will be ecstatic today." She was right. My pupils arrived at school with excitement, cheeks red from the cold, woolen mittens crusted with snow, and eyes bright with the delight only the first snowfall can bring. Even the elder kids stopped studying and stamped snow off their boots, chatting over each other about snowball fights and sledding. I made a snap decision after seeing their unbridled enthusiasm. Setting aside my grammar lessons, I told the kids we'd learn outside today. As I explained my needs, their excitement made me smile. Snowmen will be built, but school continues. You'll measure your creation's height, circumference, and proportions in pairs. Write 3 complete sentences describing your snowman using at least 5 adjectives. Tomorrow the greatest descriptions will be read. As kids scrambled for their wraps, eager for academics, I congratulated myself on education disguised as play. We trudged through knee-deep snow to the schoolyard in the cool morning air. Small hands rolled huge snowballs and debated proportions with scientific earnestness with remarkable efficiency. "Mrs. Wilson, is coal for eyes okay or wasteful?" Rebecca Miller, 12, asked, her face suddenly concerned. I told her we could spare a few pieces for teaching, helping 6-year-old Timmy Sullivan attach a crooked twig arm to his lopsided masterpiece. 2 beautiful hours were spent measuring with rulers and string. Children used more descriptive phrases for their snow structures as they balanced notebooks on mittened hands to calculate. Even with gloves, my hands were numb, but the kids' laughter warmed me. After our exertions, Joshua Hayes stacked firewood by the pot-bellied stove when we returned to the schoolhouse, cheeks blazing and garments soaking. As we fell in, he straightened and looked at me across the room. "Learning comes in many forms," he said, crinkling his eyes at our snowy appearance. I said, helping the youngest remove sodden mittens and scarves, that the best teachings don't necessarily require books. Joshua nodded, adding another log to the blazing stove. The fire warmed my flesh, but his stare, moving over the children's heads to meet mine, seemed to warm me deeper. We reached an understanding, enjoying childhood's simple pleasures and learning outside of school. I glanced away, startled by the intimacy of that unsaid exchange. "Hang damp clothes beside the stove and sit, kids. We'll practice multiplication tables while warming up." As Joshua quietly left, I wondered when this quiet rancher had become so important to me. Caleb mumbled, "I'll never read properly," flinging his book so hard that the spine split on the desktop. His stiff shoulders showed frustration as he gazed at the offending text. Letters hop like jackrabbits. Caleb attended extra reading sessions 3 evenings a week. His progress over the past month was solid, but setbacks shook his delicate confidence. A particularly difficult portion today had defied his best efforts. Instead of getting the book, I sat next him, close enough to support but not so close as to crush his pride. My mother told me something I never forgot. I whispered, "Difficulty isn't inability, just take a different route." Caleb peered at me sideways, split between hope and distrust. "Mom sounds clever." She was. I smiled at the memory. She taught me endurance trumps perfection. Since I struggled with math, she tried numerous explanations till I understood. The youngster was shocked to learn that his flawless instructor had academic struggles. "Numbers weren't your thing?" "Bad, I admit. I kept trying till I found methods that fit my mind." He frowned as Caleb thought about this. He grabbed the book again after a moment. "Maybe we might try that colored paper again? The blue one helped last week." Using my tinted transparency sheets from educational journals, I agreed that was a great idea. Some Caleb-challenged kids found colored overlays reduced letter movement. We worked for another 30 minutes, Caleb drawing words with his finger as he read aloud, halting when needed but persevering with dogged persistence that defined his character. After hearing boots on the schoolhouse stairs, Joshua arrived to pick up his kid. He usually stayed outside until our class ended, but Caleb shouted out today, "Pa, listen to me read." Joshua arrived, respectfully removing his hat and looking from his son's eager face to mine with a query. "Caleb, go ahead," I advised gently. The child squared his shoulders and read McGuffey's Third Reader, a pioneer courage chapter that had defeated him previously. His voice started unsure, but gained confidence with each sentence. He finished a paragraph despite stumbling over words and substituting others. I felt my heart swell when Joshua's normally austere face showed amazement and pride. He stayed still, hat in white-knuckled hands, as if frightened to disturb his son's success. He managed to say, "That's fine, son," his voice raspy with emotion. "Very good reading." Caleb smiled, forgetting his struggles in his father's approbation. Joshua hesitated in the doorway, looking at me with such raw thankfulness that I had to turn away, fearful he may see more in my expression than a teacher should. The December school Christmas pageant devoured my every free moment. A simple nativity story recitation had become a lavish play with costumes, music, and a wooden stable backdrop that needed construction. Joshua offered to help with the carpentry when I mentioned it after Sunday services. "I have lots of suitable scrap lumber." Thus began our collaboration. Joshua would bring tools and lumber each evening after school, after Caleb had gone to play checkers with Sheriff Daniel's wife. We measured and sawed by lamplight in the schoolhouse, while December darkness descended early outside the frosted windows. We broadened our chats beyond town life during these calm hours, with simply pounding and occasional instruction. I discovered that Joshua came west as a young man for land and independence. He established his ranch from scratch as a hired man, until he bought his own modest property. He told me one evening, as he meticulously fashioned a wooden support, that Sarah, my wife, was the local schoolmarm when I met her. He was smart, could recite Shakespeare and do figures faster than anyone I knew. I meant it. She sounds amazing. She was. His hand froze. We had 5 good years before Caleb. She was thrilled about the baby. The sadness in his words made me put down the outfit I was fixing. What happened? My request was gentle. Joshua tightened under his flannel shirt. When wife went into labor early, I had been transporting cattle to market for 3 weeks. Neighborhood boy rode out to locate me, but his voice shook by the time I returned. Doc labeled it childbed fever, no cure. He showed deep suffering from a 5-year-old wound that never healed. He said, I wasn't there when she needed me most, driving a nail too hard. That's an unpayable debt. His guilt broke my heart. I answered carefully, thinking of my mother's death and the years it took to talk about her without pain. Grief isn't something we overcome. Over time, we carry it differently. Joshua surprised me by looking up, as if hearing his innermost thoughts given voice. Yes, exactly. Though the weight doesn't decrease, you develop better ways to carry it. As we worked, the silence was no longer awkward. As I reached for a hammer, our hands brushed, causing an unexpected awareness. None of us left immediately. When I did, his callous fingers contacted my hand, tingling it and leaving me breathless. Mrs. Wilson, may I speak? Sheriff Daniels caught me descending the church steps after Sunday services. My breath formed white clouds when I paused on the cool December morning. Of course, Sheriff. Is everything okay? His wrinkled visage was exceptionally somber under his silver-streaked mustache, as he led me away from the dispersing congregation. Boston authorities seeking information on missing Eleanor Montgomery, daughter of a banker, sent me a telegram yesterday. Even with my heavy woolen coat, my blood ran cold. For the shock I felt, Sheriff Daniels could have discharged his revolver. Interesting that I kept my voice steady arguing. Any explanation? Just says she may have moved west before her wedding, with families promising a large reward. Shrugging. Probably unrelated to our town, but since you're from Massachusetts, I'll mention it. I tried to smile with frozen lips. Nice of you to tell me. The poor family must be sick and concerned. Sheriff, probably a society girl who changed her mind. Really can't blame her. Arranged weddings can be uncomfortable for women. As he stroked his hat brim and left, I noticed eyes on me. I turned to see Mrs. Foster near the church door, her piercing stare fixed on us. Even at this distance, I could see her calculation in her attitude and her narrowing eyes as she looked from the sheriff's fleeing shape to my pale face. She knew, or suspected. Nodding respectfully to Reverend Thomas, I grabbed my prayer book harder and ran toward the boarding home, feeling less comfortable than moments earlier. Christmas Eve made the plain church beautiful. Evergreen boughs gave the air a fresh, clean perfume, and dozens of candles illuminated the village. The Redemption Creek kids, clean and dressed in Sunday best, fidgeted nervously as they prepared to tell the Christmas tale. From Timothy Sullivan's gloomy Joseph to Rebecca Miller's beautiful Mary carrying a white flannel doll, their sincere performances filled me with pleasure. Caleb, who had previously resisted speaking in front of the village, spoke his shepherd's lines clearly, hiding the blue-tinted paper I gave him in his costume. Joshua's rustic stable setting was admired for giving the modest pageant realism. Joshua watched from the back row as the children sang the final carol, their angelic voices filling the church with silent darkness. His face softened with an emotion I couldn't name. After the congregation scattered into the falling snow, he approached me outside the church steps. Snowflakes sprinkled his black hair and fur coat shoulders, making him appear ethereal in the lantern light. I have something for you, he added, pulling a handkerchief-wrapped item from his pocket. He carefully handed me a palm-sized wooden box with a lovely leaf pattern on the lid. Beautiful, Joshua. Running my fingertips across the smooth surface, I exhaled, appreciating the hours of craftsmanship. Softly open it, he said. A delicate silver pendant on a thin chain was within on a soft linen. Using lamplight, a tiny book opened to reveal a miniature rose looked elegant. Joshua, I couldn't possibly, I said, stunned by the gift and its meaning. My mother's, he said gently. She taught before marrying my father. His voice grew deeper, vibrating through the frigid night air between us. "Ellie, Mrs. Wilson, I love you increasingly. It's been months since your husband died, but I'd like to court you properly." Joy and panic battled so fiercely that I could barely breathe. I urgently wanted to accept his offer. This wonderful, honest man, who had come to mean more to me than I dared confess. However, my falsehood now bound us both. Every time we got closer, I betrayed his trust. Honored, indeed. I closed and pressed the box into his hands. "I'm not ready. I'm sorry." I turned and ran, my eyes blurred with unshed tears before he could speak or I could weaken and retract my remarks. Joshua stood alone, puzzled, and clutching a present I had declined for reasons he couldn't comprehend behind me, behind the gradually sliding white curtain. Each flake of snow silently dropped around us, adding another secret, lie, or barrier between my heart and the future it craved. Chapter 5. Secrets and Storms. The first daylight of January 1874 came gently through my window, illuminating the frost patterns tiny fingers of cold had etched over the glass overnight. My mother's Bible was in my lap as I sat alone in my room in my nightgown despite the chill. I kept seeing the same phrases and proverbs during my sleepless night. The true lip lasts forever, but the deceitful tongue is temporary. Elegant script on tissue-thin pages resulted from divine judgment for my dishonesty. I traced the words with my fingertip, feeling each letter's small indentation as if they were burned into my skin rather than printed on paper. Redemption Creek celebrated the new year with a community lunch at the church, hymn singing, and prayers for prosperity. I attended out of duty, hiding among the students to avoid talking to Joshua. I pretended not to notice his confused look at my hasty exit, as his wounded eyes followed me all evening. A soft knock on the door stopped my ruminations. "Mrs. Wilson?" Hattie called quietly. "Got you tea, dear? May I enter?" I quickly wiped a tear and straightened my shoulders. "Of course, Hattie." The door creaked open to show my landlady with a hot cup and a worried face. She placed the tea on my bedside table and rested her heavy bulk on my bed, the springs creaking. "Noticed you've been avoiding some people recently," she murmured gently, straightening her apron with her worn fingers, "especially a rancher who can't stop staring at you." She tilted her head, motherly observing my face. "A woman sees another's heartache." Her gentle voice shattered my composure. I murmured, "Hattie, I've messed up again," threatening tears. She comforted me with a hand pat. "Child, life rarely goes straight. The longest way may teach us what we need." Instead of judgment, her fading blue eyes showed wisdom from years and events I couldn't understand. "Our journeys are purposed by the good Lord." I touched Mother's Bible, my one actual possession from my old life, and felt its weight. Is the truth going to destroy everything I've found good? The inquiry came unexpectedly, uncomfortably near to confession. Hattie watched steadily. Truth emerges like a spring from mountain rock, better to direct it than be washed away. Standing, she smoothed her skirts. "Remember, you're not alone in your burdens. We have narrower shoulders than God." I struggled to find consolation in my tea and thoughts after she left me. Through January, I kept my distance from Joshua Hayes. I delivered cordial welcomes at church and municipal events to avoid intimate interaction. I kept another student for Caleb's after-school classes to avoid personal conversation when Joshua picked him up. He accepted my boundaries with a dignity that only increased my guilt. No requests for explanation, no public display of injured feelings, only silent uncertainty in his dark eyes and formality that had replaced the tenderness we had briefly enjoyed. Mrs. Wilson, his good afternoon felt like a dozen unasked inquiries. On a chilly Tuesday afternoon, I taught geography about prominent American cities. I had sketched a decent Boston map on the chalkboard, emphasizing the neighborhood's significance. Chalk tapping against slate, I said Beacon Hill is a top address. The greatest families have lived there for years, overlooking the Common. Commonwealth Avenue was built later, but has impressive homes. Back Bay was filled up to make room for growth. After describing Boston's social structure in the streets, I realized my enthusiasm was excessive when I witnessed the children's rapt attention. I revealed much more personal information than a small-town instructor from a modest academy should. Despite his reading challenges, Caleb Hayes thought sharply and cocked his head. "Mrs. Wilson, you know fancy people well." Flutters of panic across my chest. "Caleb, good teachers learn a lot," I said, trying to sound light while looking at the blackboard. "Who can name Massachusetts' top exports?" After the last bell rung and the kids left, I organized papers at my desk, relieved to have avoided suspicion. However, a familiar voice from the doorway interrupted my satisfaction. Interesting lesson today. Mrs. Foster stood inside the schoolroom, her dark wool outfit stark against the whitewashed walls and her hawk-like eyes. I overheard when returning books to your shelf. Her weak smile never reached her eyes. Your knowledge of Boston's elite areas is outstanding for a small-town instructor. Though my heart raced under my high-necked shirt, I stared at her. I replied that my academy served wealthy families, the familiar half-truth coming effortlessly. One learns by watching. Indeed. She carefully placed several McGuffey readers on my desk. Best to learn via observation. I've noticed that no Middlesex County resident has heard of the modest academy where you taught. We felt her menace in her words, unspoken but clear. I remarked, how lucky that my credentials satisfied the town council, imitating her icy tone while gathering my luggage. Sorry, Mrs. Foster, I have papers to grade. She left with a rustle of heavy skirts and a vow to continue our talk. February brought colder temperatures and silver sky. Mountain winds whispered about approaching storms, and longtime inhabitants warned about the worst winter in a decade. The schoolhouse door opened unexpectedly as I started afternoon math. Joshua Hayes appeared in the doorway, snow on his shoulders and hat, his face bleak. He called Mrs. Wilson, his voice echoing across the still classroom. Storms going faster than expected. Telegraph warnings were dispatched by the weather agency. Winter days pleasure young scholars worldwide, and the kids burst into enthusiastic whispers. Joshua's command broke through their banter. I'm taking everyone home safely. Parents have collected outlying farm kids. Town kids must quickly congregate. I swiftly helped the youngest children bundle into coats and scarves, and told the older ones to take their readers home to study. The sky had darkened, and snow was falling, large flakes blown sideways by the wind. Joshua carried 6-year-old Emma Peterson, her face nearly concealed in her woolen scarf. We carefully delivered the last 12 children to their doorsteps in quickly deepening snow. As visibility decreased, Joshua carried the smallest through the worst drifts as I guided the older ones, establishing a human chain. After bringing the last pupil to his frightened mother, we stood alone in the intensifying wind on the tiny roadway between buildings. I'll get you to the boarding house securely, Joshua said, snow whitening his dark beard and eyebrows. That's unnecessary, I said, reluctant to spend even these few minutes with him. Not a request, Mrs. Wilson. He was formal, reflecting the careful distance I had constructed between us these weeks and the hard-won familiarity of Ellie long abandoned. I nodded unwillingly, and we went forth into the blinding white. Wind-blown drifts had disguised the traditional path to Hattie's boarding house, making it dangerous. The wind changed dramatically halfway there, pelting us with snow and ice crystals. Joshua immediately drew me against the mercantile building's shelter, protecting me from the gale. The breeze was blocked by his large shoulders and arms on either side of me. I leaned my forehead against his coat's rough wool, grateful for a break from the storm. We'll wait for this gust, he whispered, sounding near to my ear over the wind's roar. I felt unbelievable safety in his presence despite my careful distance and wall of propriety and deception. My body realized what my mind battled against, that Joshua's arms held a refuge deeper than physical protection from the weather. After the wind died down, he held my elbow and escorted me to Hattie's door through the heaviest snow. I turned to thank him at the entrance, but he had already tipped his hat and disappeared into the storm's white veil. Nighttime blizzards rattled windows, and wailing down the chimney like tormented spirits. I slept poorly, awakening often to the storm's crescendos, and remembering Joshua's face as he left me, stoic and responsible, his anguish hidden under frontier practicality. Dawn brought just a weird half-light through falling snow. Hattie's persistent knocking rocked my door after I finished dressing. Eleanor, hurry. My first name, not Mrs. Wilson, conveyed emergency more than her tone. Joshua's here. It's Caleb. The man is gone. Joshua was in Hattie's parlor when I ran down the stairs, still fastening my throat buttons. Seeing a father filled with terror, not the collected, capable guy who had guarded me from yesterday's storm, took my breath away. His face was drawn, eyes red-rimmed from weariness or suppressed tears, and his customary immaculate appearance was gone in crisis. Joshua said directly, his voice harsh, that he wasn't in bed this morning. Must have left overnight. Tracks from the house were half filled with new snow. I wondered why he would leave amid a storm, alternating incredulity and dread. Joshua stretched a crumpled paper with a shudder, found this on his pillow. The childish writing with inverted letters blurred as I read, searching for proof. Mrs. Wilson is our assistive angel. Back shortly. Do not worry. Angel, I muttered, confusion briefly overpowering dread. It's what he calls you when we're alone, Joshua said, blushing. Since you started teaching him read, he broke down, saying God sent you to us. He stated he found something in a cave on the ridge where he thinks it would indicate you were heaven sent. My thoughts raced, then remembered. Caleb happily shows me his autumn afternoon hidden spot after school. An abandoned mine entrance, I remarked, reaching for my coat. He showed me after school. We must leave. I could see Joshua was relieved. Sheriff organizes search parties during storm. No time to wait, I said, throwing a woolen scarf around my neck and tucking gloves into my pockets. Even in good weather, that mine entrance was unstable. Hattie handed me a coffee flask and pastries. She whispered, "The Lord go with you both," making the cross as we entered the bright white globe. The hip-deep snow made every step difficult. Joshua powered ahead of me through drifts that would have stopped me. Despite woolen covering, the cold penetrated every layer, numbing my face and hands. The normally 30-minute trek to the foothills became an arduous journey as the temperature dropped. Joshua moved with single-minded concentration, only sometimes looking back to make sure I was following. In the cold air, our breath formed thick clouds that crystallized fast, making words precious commodities we must not waste. Finally, through the snow, the mine entrance's dark smudge revealed a jagged cut in the mountainside, half concealed by a century-old tree. I felt sick at the sight. Snow had partially destroyed the entrance, which was never stable. Joshua frantically called his son's name. Silence replied him for a terrible moment. Caleb spoke weakly from the darkness. "Pa, that you?" Joshua changed after his relief. "I'm here, son. You hurt?" "My legs caught under rocks," he said, terrified. "Nobody can move it." "Pa, it's dark here." Joshua tore at the snow and debris blocking the entrance, but the aperture was too narrow for his broad shoulders. With each widening attempt, additional rubble fell from above, threatening to close the entrance. "I'll go," I said, taking off my thick coat. My woolen dress froze, but heavier outerwear would never fit through the narrow hole. "It's too hazardous," Joshua said, his face agonizing over the impossible option. No time for arguments. I looked into his eyes to earn his trust and his most valuable property. "Joshua, trust me." I think my voice reached him, since he nodded firmly. His pocket held a little miner's lamp, which he gave me. "And this." He wrapped his scarf over my neck over mine. "Please shout so I know you're okay." My shoulders barely fit through the opening. I squeezed through sideways, feeling jagged rocks rip my clothes and scrape my skin. After being overwhelmed by darkness, I struggled to light Joshua's little lamp. "Caleb," I yelled, my voice echoing unnaturally in the small space. "Mrs. Wilson?" Boy spoke in disbelief. "You come for me?" I followed the sound, mindful of loose rocks, until the lamplight revealed Caleb hunched against the far wall of an abandoned prospector's cave, not a mine. Cold and terror made his little face pale and frozen with tear tracks. His right leg disappeared behind a mound of smaller pebbles and dirt that had fallen from the unsteady ceiling, not gigantic boulders as I had anticipated. I kneeled beside him and carefully placed the lamp on a flat stone, saying I came. Your father and I would never abandon you. I rapidly assessed his cold, terrified, but alert condition. "Release that leg and get home to warm up." I chatted while carefully removing the debris pinning his limb to distract him from pain and terror. I sung hymns with a slight trembling and recited poems from memory, while slowly loosening his leg. "Are Pa's claims true? Will you no longer be our buddies?" Caleb inquired suddenly, stilled hands. "Why think that? Heard Pa tell Sheriff you pushed him away and didn't want to talk to him?" A confused look crossed his young face. "Were we wrong?" "You've done nothing wrong, dear," I said, starting my job with newfound vigor. "Adult friendships can be complicated." "Not an angel, are you?" he asked, disappointed despite his situation. "Once I found a nice handkerchief here. Initials on it, E.M. I thought it proved you were intended to teach me to read." My heart nearly stopped when I saw the monogrammed handkerchief I'd overlooked weeks earlier. A piece of Eleanor Montgomery that could link me to the sheriff's message. I honestly informed him angels don't get cold or terrified. I'm both now. His leg emerged bruised and scratched yet surprisingly unbroken. I supported him while he tested his wounded limb. He boldly declared, "I can walk," yet his face paled at the first step. I offered to assist, sliding my arm around his waist. "Outside your father waits." We made it to the cave entrance, where Joshua's apprehensive visage showed in the tight aperture. "He's well, legs damaged but not broken," I phoned. Caleb's passage through the narrow entryway was difficult but achievable. Joshua gently pulled his son into his arms while I helped his damaged leg through the tiny gap. Joshua hugged us both with one strong arm when I finally squeezed through. Caleb was between us, and Joshua's free hand cupped my head, bringing me into their warmth. He said hoarsely, his breath warm against my freezing cheek, "Thank God. Praise God for you both." For one beautiful minute, I imagined this was my real life, that I was Ellie Wilson, that these arms were meant to hold me, and that this father and boy were my family. As the snow fell gently around our huddled forms, I allowed myself this moment of belonging before reality returned with its problems and implications.